Hi, I'm Sarah. My sister used to call my husband a lowly farmer, yes, until she begged us to save her lavish lifestyle from complete collapse. You know that feeling when your own family makes you question everything you believe in? That moment when the people who are supposed to support you most are the ones tearing you down? Well, let me tell you about the Thanksgiving dinner that changed my entire perspective on what real success actually looks like. Picture this. I'm sitting at my parents' dining room table, nervous as hell because I'm about to introduce Jake to my family for the first time. Jake's this incredible man, kind, hardworking, with these gentle hands that can fix anything and the most genuine smile you've ever seen. But here's the thing. He's a farmer, and in my family that apparently makes him worthless. The moment Jake mentions what he does for a living, the temperature in the room drops about 20 degrees. My sister Emily, she's sitting there in her designer dress that probably costs more than most people make in a month, and she literally laughs. Not a polite chuckle, but this cruel, mocking laugh that makes my stomach twist into knots. Seriously, Sarah? Emily says, looking at me like I just told her I was dating a serial killer. A farmer? Like, actually working in dirt and wearing overalls? She turns to her husband, Marcus, this guy in an expensive suit who works in finance, and they share this look. You know the look. The one that says, "Can you believe how pathetic this is?" Marcus jumps right in because of course he does. Emily's right to be concerned, he says, cutting into his prime rib like he's cutting into my heart. I mean, no offense, Jake, but agriculture isn't exactly a growth industry. I just closed a $2 million deal last week. Maybe I could help you transition into something more substantial. The silence that follows is deafening. My parents just sit there, not saying a word, but their expressions say everything. They're embarrassed. Embarrassed of me, embarrassed of Jake, embarrassed that their daughter chose someone they consider beneath our family's standards. Jake, bless his heart, just nods politely and says, "Farming's been good to me. There's something to be said for working the land." But I can see it in his eyes. He's hurt. He's trying to hide it, but I know him well enough to see the pain flickering behind that composed exterior. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you love is being attacked and you just freeze? Where you know you should stand up and fight back, but the words just won't come? That was me in that moment. I sat there like a coward while my family destroyed the man I loved. Emily wasn't done, though. Oh no, she was just getting started. "Sarah, honey, you need to think about your future. What kind of life can a farmer really provide? I mean, look at Marcus and me. We live in a penthouse downtown. We vacation in Europe twice a year. Our kids go to private school. That's the kind of life you deserve, not some farmhouse in the middle of nowhere." The worst part? My parents nodded along like she was some kind of life coach dropping wisdom. My own mother, the woman who raised me, looked at Jake and said, "Emily has a point, dear. Security is important in a marriage." That dinner felt like it lasted forever. Every bite of food tasted like cardboard. Every word felt like a personal attack. By the time we left, I was questioning everything. Was I making a mistake? Was my family right? Was I throwing away my future for some romantic fantasy about true love? But here's what really started eating at me. It wasn't just that one dinner. Over the next few months, Emily made it her personal mission to remind me at every family gathering how much better her life was than mine. She'd show up to Sunday dinners with shopping bags from Nordstrom and Saks, talking about Marcus's latest bonus or their upcoming trip to the Bahamas. "Oh, Sarah," she'd say with this fake concerned voice, "are you sure Jake can afford to take you anywhere nice for your anniversary? Marcus booked us the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton. Maybe we could help you guys out with a weekend getaway somewhere more budget-friendly." The comparisons never stopped. When I showed up in a dress from Target, Emily would mention her new Prada handbag. When Jake and I talked about our simple wedding plans, Emily would reminisce about her $100,000 extravaganza. It was like she was keeping score, and I was losing every single round. My parents ate it up. Suddenly, every conversation became about Emily's success and my apparent failure to launch. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my mother's favorite phrase. "Emily and Marcus just bought a new BMW. Maybe you should ask Marcus for career advice, Sarah." The breaking point came at Emily's housewarming party for their new penthouse. Jake and I showed up in our best clothes, which granted weren't exactly designer label, and Emily greeted us at the door with this patronizing smile. "Oh, you two made it," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I wasn't sure you'd be comfortable around all these successful people, but I'm so glad you decided to come anyway." She literally introduced us to her friends as my sister who married a farmer. Not my sister Sarah and her husband Jake. Not even just my sister and her husband. No, it was always my sister who married a farmer, like it was some kind of tragic diagnosis. I watched Jake's face throughout that party, and it broke my heart. Here's this amazing man who works harder than anyone I know, who provides for us, who loves me unconditionally, and he's being treated like some kind of charity case. People would talk to him with this fake sympathy, like they were interviewing someone from a disaster zone. "So farming, huh?" one of Marcus's colleagues said, clearly struggling to find common ground. "That must be interesting. Do you have like animals and stuff?" Jake handled it with more grace than these people deserved, but I could see him withdrawing more and more as the night went on. When we finally left, we drove home in complete silence. What was there to say? My own family had humiliated us both, and I'd let it happen. That night, lying in bed in our modest but comfortable home, I started really questioning my choices. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe I was settling. Maybe love wasn't enough if it meant a lifetime of being looked down on by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But then something started nagging at me. Despite all of Emily's bragging about their wealth and success, I'd noticed some things that didn't quite add up. The designer clothes, the expensive cars, the lavish lifestyle, it all seemed a little too perfect, a little too showy. Real wealthy people I'd met before didn't usually feel the need to announce their success to everyone in the room. And there was something else. Something I'd been carrying around for months but hadn't really thought about seriously until now. After my grandmother passed away last year, the lawyer had mentioned something about her property, something about how she'd left specific instructions about her land. But with all the funeral arrangements and family drama, I'd never really followed up on the details. I remembered my grandmother always talking about her land with this special pride in her voice. She'd grown up during the Depression, and to her, land meant security in a way that nothing else could. Paper money can disappear overnight, she used to tell me. But land is forever. Maybe it was time I started looking into what exactly my grandmother had left behind. Maybe there was more to the story than my family's narrow definition of success. Maybe Emily's world of finance and flash wasn't as solid as it appeared to be. Because here's what I was starting to realize. Real security, real success, isn't always about the biggest house or the fanciest car. Sometimes it's about something much more fundamental, much more lasting. And maybe, just maybe, Jake and I had something that Emily and Marcus would never understand. Something that was about to turn their entire world upside down. What would you do if your family constantly made you feel like your choices were wrong? Have you ever been in a situation where the people closest to you made you question everything you believed in? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. That nagging feeling about my grandmother's land wouldn't leave me alone. 3 weeks after Emily's humiliating housewarming party, I finally decided to dig through the boxes of paperwork from Grandma's estate that I'd been avoiding since the funeral. I was sitting in our kitchen, our simple, cozy kitchen that Emily would probably call quaint in that condescending way of hers, when I found the old jewelry box buried beneath a stack of photo albums. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was a thick manila envelope with my name written in Grandma's careful handwriting. My hands were actually shaking as I opened it. The first document I pulled out was a land deed, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. As I read through the legal language, my heart started pounding. According to this deed, my grandmother had left me 200 acres of prime farmland just outside the city limits. Not Emily. Me. But that wasn't even the shocking part. Attached to the deed was a letter in Grandma's handwriting, dated just 6 months before she passed away. "My dearest Sarah," it read, "I'm leaving you the land because you're the only one who understands its real value. Your sister sees only dollar signs and status symbols, but you see the beauty in simple, honest work. This land has been in our family for 3 generations, and I trust you to honor that legacy. The soil is rich, the location is perfect, and I have a feeling that in the right hands, this property will be worth more than anyone in our family realizes. Don't let them convince you that farming isn't noble work. Sometimes the quietest people hold the most valuable cards. I must have read that letter 5 times before it really sank in. My grandmother had seen something in Jake and me that the rest of my family couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. She'd recognized that our simple life had real value, real substance. Jake came in from checking on our small vegetable garden just as I was processing all of this. When I showed him the deed and the letter, his reaction surprised me. He didn't seem shocked at all. "Your grandmother was a smart woman," he said quietly, studying the property boundaries on the deed. "This land, Sarah, do you realize where this is located?" I looked at the address more carefully. It was about 20 miles from where we currently lived, in an area I vaguely remembered visiting as a child. "Why? What's special about it?" Jake pulled out his phone and started typing. Within minutes, he was showing me satellite images and county planning documents. "This area has been designated for future development. The state's planning a new highway that'll run right past this property. And look at this." He pointed to his screen. "There's been talk about a new shopping complex going in just 5 miles away." My head was spinning. "What does that mean?" "It means your grandmother's land isn't just valuable for farming, though the soil quality is incredible. It's valuable for development, too. Sarah, we're potentially looking at land worth several million dollars." Several million dollars. The words echoed in my head as I thought about Emily's constant bragging about Marcus's huge deals and their expensive lifestyle. Had we been sitting on a fortune this entire time while my family treated us like charity cases? That's when Jake suggested we call his college friend Ben, who'd gone into agricultural investment after graduation. I remembered Jake mentioning Ben before. Apparently, he'd built a successful business helping investors understand the real value of agricultural properties. Ben drove out to meet us the next weekend, and what he told us changed everything I thought I knew about farming and wealth. "Jake, I've been watching your operation here," Ben said, walking through our modest farm. "You're doing exactly what the most successful agricultural entrepreneurs are doing. Small scale, high quality, sustainable practices. But this land your grandmother left, this is next level opportunity." He pulled out a folder thick with documents and spread them across our kitchen table. Market analyses, soil reports, development projections, comparable property sales. It was like looking at a completely different world than the one my family inhabited. "Here's what most people don't understand about modern farming," Ben explained. "It's not about a guy in overalls barely scraping by. The most successful farmers today are running multi-million-dollar operations. They're using technology, sustainable practices, and strategic land management to build real wealth." He showed us examples of similar properties that had sold recently. One farm, smaller than what Grandma had left me, had sold for $4.2 million. Another had been leased to a solar energy company for $800,000 per year while still maintaining agricultural use. "Jake's already proved he knows what he's doing," Ben continued. "Your current farm generates good revenue, and you've built a reputation for quality. With this additional land and with the development potential, honestly, you two could be looking at becoming one of the wealthiest families in the county." I felt like I was living in some kind of alternate reality. While Emily had been mocking Jake for being a lowly farmer, we'd actually been building something substantial. While Marcus had been bragging about his finance deals, Jake had been quietly mastering an industry that most people completely misunderstood. But Ben wasn't finished dropping bombshells. "Jake, have you been following the news about Pinnacle Investment Group?" Jake's face darkened. "Marcus's company? Yeah, I've seen some concerning reports." "What kind of reports?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Ben pulled out his phone and showed us several financial news articles. "They've been heavily leveraged in some very risky investments. Cryptocurrency, speculative real estate, some overseas ventures that are looking increasingly unstable. There are rumors that they might be under investigation for some questionable practices." My stomach dropped. Despite everything Emily and Marcus had put us through, I didn't want to see them get hurt. But as Ben explained more about Pinnacle's situation, I realized this wasn't just about bad luck or market fluctuations. This was about the fundamental difference between real wealth and the illusion of wealth. The thing about flashy finance, and Ben said, is that it can disappear overnight. Real assets, land, sustainable businesses, tangible value. That's what weathers storms. Your grandmother understood that. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to Emily's social media posts and her behavior at family gatherings. Once you knew what to look for, the cracks were obvious. The designer clothes appeared less frequently. The vacation photos stopped. She started making comments about budgeting and being more responsible with finances. But my parents were still completely oblivious. In fact, they seemed more critical of Jake and me than ever. At Sunday dinner, Mom would make passive-aggressive comments about how we needed to think about our future and how Emily and Marcus were such good planners. That's when the late-night phone call came. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday when my phone rang. Emily's name flashed on the screen, and my first thought was that someone had died. But when I answered, what I heard was worse than grief. It was pure, desperate panic. "Sarah," Emily sobbed into the phone, "I need your help. We're going to lose everything." Through her tears, the whole story came tumbling out. Marcus's company was indeed under investigation. Their investments had collapsed completely. They'd been living on credit and leveraged debt for months, keeping up appearances while their financial world crumbled around them. The penthouse was already in foreclosure. The cars would be repossessed within days. "Mom and Dad are coming over tomorrow morning," Emily continued, her voice cracking. We need you to help us. We need you to sell your farm and loan us the money to get back on our feet, just until Marcus can rebuild his client base." I sat there in the dark, listening to my sister, the same sister who had mocked my husband, humiliated us in public, and made us feel worthless for years, asking me to sacrifice everything to save her illusion of success. "Emily, I said carefully, "how much money are we talking about?" "Maybe $500,000. We know it's a lot, but Sarah, we're family. And we'll pay you back with interest once Marcus gets established again. You know we're good for it." $500,000? To save the lifestyle of the people who had spent years telling me I'd married beneath myself. I told Emily I'd think about it and call her back. But as I hung up the phone, I knew exactly what my answer would be. The question was how to handle the family meeting that I knew was coming. Sure enough, Mom called the next morning. "Sarah, honey, we need to have a family meeting. Emily and Marcus are going through a difficult time, and we all need to pull together to help them." Jake was in the barn when I found him to tell him about the calls. He listened without saying a word, then walked over to our filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd never seen before. "I've been waiting for this conversation," he said quietly. I figured it would come eventually. Inside the folder were documents I didn't even know existed. Official appraisals of Grandma's land, revenue projections for agricultural use, development potential assessments, business plans that Jake had apparently been working on for months. "Sarah, we need to talk to Ben again," Jake said. "Before your family gets here, you need to understand exactly what you're sitting on." Ben drove over that afternoon and spread everything out on our kitchen table like he was preparing for battle. The numbers were staggering. The land value alone was appraised at $4.2 million. The annual agricultural revenue potential was over $800,000. If we chose to lease portions for solar development while maintaining farming operations, we could be looking at additional income streams that would make Marcus's finance salary look like pocket change. "Here's what your family doesn't understand," Ben said, looking directly at me. "They think farming is about poverty and struggle, because that's the stereotype. But Jake isn't just a farmer. He's an agricultural entrepreneur. And with this land, he's potentially one of the most successful ones in the state." That evening, my parents arrived with Emily and Marcus in tow. Emily looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Marcus, usually so polished and confident, looked like a broken man. My parents had that determined expression that meant they'd already decided how this conversation was going to go. "Sarah," Dad began, "Emily has explained the situation. We know this is a big ask, but family comes first. We need you to sell the farm and help Emily and Marcus get back on their feet. It's temporary, Mom added quickly. Once Marcus rebuilds his client base, they'll pay you back with interest. And really, dear, what kind of future do you have on a farm anyway? This could be an opportunity for you and Jake to start fresh in something more stable. Emily hadn't said a word since they arrived, but Marcus jumped in with his usual condescending tone, though it seemed forced now, desperate. Sarah, I know we've had our differences, he said, but I'm still the financial expert in this family. I can help you invest the money from the farm sale in something that will actually grow. Agriculture just isn't a viable long-term investment. That's when Jake spoke up. He'd been sitting quietly, listening to everything, but now he stood up and walked over to our filing cabinet. Actually, Marcus, Jake said, his voice calm but firm, I think you might be misinformed about agricultural investments. He began laying out the documents on the coffee table. The land appraisals, the business projections, the development potential assessments. With each document, I watched my family's expressions change from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. Sarah inherited 200 acres of prime agricultural land from her grandmother, Jake continued. This land is currently appraised at $4.2 million. Our annual agricultural revenue projections are over $800,000. If we choose to explore development opportunities while maintaining agricultural use, we're looking at potentially double that. The silence in the room was deafening. Dad picked up one of the appraisal documents with shaking hands. For $4 million? That's correct, Jake said. Ben here is an agricultural investment specialist. Ben, would you mind explaining to Sarah's family how modern agricultural business actually works? Ben launched into the same explanation he'd given us weeks earlier. The technology, the sustainability practices, the market demands, the investment potential. He showed them examples of successful agricultural entrepreneurs who were worth tens of millions of dollars. Jake owns one of the most valuable farms in the state, Ben concluded. Emily called him a lowly farmer, but honestly, he's built something that most finance professionals would kill for. Stable, sustainable, constantly appreciating assets with multiple revenue streams. Emily's face had gone completely white. But you live in that little farmhouse. You drive an old truck. You wear... She gestured helplessly at Jake's simple work clothes. I wear practical clothes for practical work, Jake said simply. Unlike some people, I don't need to display my wealth to feel secure about it. Marcus was staring at the documents like they might disappear if he looked away. This can't be right. Sarah, you never said anything about... we assumed. You assumed that because we don't live flashy lives, we must be poor, I said, finally finding my voice. You spent years making us feel worthless because we didn't match your definition of success. But here's the thing. While you were building a house of cards with other people's money, we were building something real. Mom looked bewildered. But Sarah, if you have all this money, why do you live so simply? Jake answered before I could. Because we don't need to prove our worth to anyone. We're secure in what we've built. We don't need designer clothes or expensive cars to feel good about ourselves. And, I added, looking directly at Emily, we learned something important about the difference between being rich and acting rich. Acting rich is about spending money you don't have to impress people who don't matter. Being rich is about having security, having options, and having the freedom to live according to your own values. The room fell silent again. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things. I treated Jake horribly. I was so wrong about everything. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the confident, superior woman who'd been making my life miserable. I saw someone who'd built her entire identity on an illusion and was now facing the collapse of everything she thought defined her worth. Emily, I said gently, I forgive you, but I'm not going to sell our land to bail you out. Not because I want to punish you, but because you need to learn the same lesson Jake and I learned. That real security comes from building something sustainable, not from quick fixes or borrowed money. Dad cleared his throat. But Sarah, she's your sister. Surely there's something. There is something, Jake said. If Emily and Marcus are serious about rebuilding their lives, I'd be happy to teach them about sustainable agriculture. There's always work for people willing to learn. But it means giving up the designer lifestyle and focusing on building real wealth instead of the appearance of wealth. Marcus's face flushed red. You want me to work on a farm? I have an MBA from Wharton. And look where that got you, Jake replied calmly. Pride isn't going to pay your bills, Marcus. Hard work will. Emily surprised everyone by nodding slowly. He's right, she said, looking at Marcus. Our way obviously didn't work. Maybe it's time to try something different. Over the following months, Emily and Marcus moved in with my parents while they figured out their next steps. Emily took a job as a receptionist at a local business, and Marcus eventually found work as an insurance salesman. It was humbling for both of them, but especially for Marcus, who'd spent years defining himself by his supposed financial genius. Emily did eventually apologize. Really apologize. Not just the surface-level sorry she'd offered that night. She came to understand that her mockery of Jake hadn't just been wrong, it had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about what real success looked like. I spent so many years chasing the image of wealth that I forgot to build actual wealth, she told me one afternoon as we sat on our front porch. You and Jake were building something real while Marcus and I were just performing. Jake, being the generous man he is, did eventually offer to help them learn about sustainable living and financial responsibility, not by giving them money, but by teaching them skills that would serve them for the rest of their lives. As for us, we kept living simply despite our newfound knowledge of our wealth. We used some of the land for expanded agricultural operations, leased a portion for a solar energy project, and set aside a conservation area to honor Grandma's memory. The money we made went into secure investments and savings, real wealth building, not flashy spending. I framed Grandma's letter and hung it in our kitchen, right next to the window where I can see Jake working in the fields every morning. Sometimes the quiet ones really do hold the most valuable cards. My family learned an important lesson that year about the difference between wealth and the performance of wealth. And I learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's living well and proving that your choices were right all along. Have you ever been underestimated because of your profession or your partner's career? Have you discovered that the people looking down on you actually had less than you realized? Share your story in the comments. I believe you, and sometimes the quiet success stories are the most powerful ones of all.